I would like to welcome you all to this workshop, which is part of the Cyber Quarter seminar series. I would like to take this opportunity to thank our funders, European Union, Marches Led, Midlands Engine, University of Wolverhampton, Hereford Council, and Skylon Park. I would like to now introduce our esteemed speaker, Professor Stephen Furnell. Professor Stephen is the Professor of Cybersecurity at the University of Nottingham. He is also an Adjunct Professor at Edith Cowan University in Australia. Before I hand over to Professor Stephen, I would like everyone to know that we will be recording this workshop, and so we ask everyone to kindly keep their videos and microphones switched off. If you have any questions, you can add to the chat box, which is on the right of your screen, and Professor Stephen will look at these questions and answer them at the end of the session. I will now pass over to Professor Stephen.
Okay, thanks very much. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for this talk, which apparently is about users and cybersecurity. So I've given it the subtitle here, Why Guide Them, if we can make them guess. And I suppose, well, hopefully I'll explain why I've picked that title as we go through. And I think the underlying thing here is basically that, okay, there's a lot of expectation around users, us, that is basically, and our potential to interact with cybersecurity. But I don't know about you, I sometimes feel that, okay, there's expectation upon us, but not necessarily the support there to enable us to fulfill the dream that somebody else has about what we might be doing. So this is what I'm hoping to explore as we go through. And let's see if I can pull that a bit closer. There we go. Right. So in terms of the context a little bit more then. So I say we as users, so it is us, we have this important role to play in cybersecurity. For ourselves as individuals, we've got data, we've got sensitive things, valuable things that we want to protect. And if we think about it in the context of us as employees, staff, users within an organization, there are things that the organization would like us to do to safeguard its assets and the things that it values as well. Now, if you read around this topic a little bit, you do a web search for users and cybersecurity, humans and cybersecurity, because most of them are human, even though you see pictures of dogs on the internet. They're often characterized as the weakest link. This phrase comes up quite a lot. You know, people are the weakest link, users are the weakest link in cybersecurity, humans the weakest link in the cybersecurity chain, and all of this sort of stuff. And okay, I mean, to be honest, you know, just between you and me, people are often a weak link in cybersecurity. You know, it's also quite fashionable to say, oh, people, they're the strongest link in cybersecurity. They can be, and your people are your assets and all that. Yeah, okay, fine, that's true also, but they're not going to be necessarily if we've not positioned them to do so. So perhaps left to their own devices with their default behaviors, people are often the weakest link. You know, say it quietly because it's often true. And what that tends to imply, and this is the bit where I would disagree with it, is that a lot of security issues are their fault. Now, they might be contributing to them, but the reason they're in that position a lot of the time is because they've not been given that support to know how to do it better, properly, correctly, whatever the right word is. So, as I say there in the third bullet, having policies, providing technologies, yeah, that's good. We need to do that. We need to have a policy. We need to provide technologies that people can use to protect themselves, to protect the organisation. But that doesn't mean by default that the policies are understood or that the technologies get used correctly. Again, goes back to that thing of support. So, is enough done to support people? And you can think about this for yourselves now. As a user of technology, do you feel that you're supported in your use of cybersecurity? You know, so throw things into the chat and tell me that I'm already on the wrong track and we might as well stop now because you think the support is wonderful. So are the technologies and processes, you know, that you're required to use, that we deal out to other people, are they obvious? Are they usable? And are people expected to know these things by default? You know, so we don't need to explain the technology because it's so obvious, it's usable, it's clear, and everybody gets it right. I mean, I'm not sure that that's actually true with cybersecurity, and we'll have an example as we go through. So, okay, what this ends up giving us, and I use this slide sort of quite often in presentations when I'm talking about users and awareness and cybersecurity, and it goes back to, you might be able to read it, I could just about read it on the slide, so should you be able to. It goes back to Information Security Magazine's survey all the way back in 2002, so that's 2 decades old now. So yeah, so Steve Furnell citing recent literature. But the reason I keep using it is I quite like this quote, really, because, you know, as it says there, one of the respondents in this particular survey was pointing out the problem they face is the ordinary, unalert, uninterested, lax, ignorant, uncaring end users. Hands up if you feel that's you. You know, pick any of those really polite and positive words that describe the user and see if you feel you fit into that category. Because, okay, this might clearly it's what this particular respondent felt of their user base, but we need to think again about, why are people ignorant of things? Why are they uncaring? Have they not been given a motivation to care? Note the heading of that article, or the section of that article, which is the key sort of message really of this: training remains the weakest link. People then were under-supported in terms of the provision that was made to help them understand and enact and live by cybersecurity, or probably information security as we were calling it then. And that might explain why people were considered to be uninterested, laxing. If you've not tried to engage them properly, then their default position isn't going to be engaged, perhaps. So that leads me smoothly-ish into the theme of handling cybersecurity awareness, how we do it, and potentially, as I've said there in the brackets there, potentially mishandling this issue. So let's see what I mean by that. It's a voyage of discovery for me every time I click the button to see what slide is coming next. So here, in case you're not familiar with it, hopefully you'll gather from the bottom of it, this is something from the National Cybersecurity Centre. And this is the infographic that represents the current incarnation of what are called the 10 steps to cybersecurity. This is something that the National Cybersecurity Centre recommends that organisations, particularly medium and large organisations, ought to be considering as a holistic approach to addressing their cybersecurity needs. And you can see I've subtly there highlighted one of those steps: engagement and training. So it's one of the 10 things that the NCSC recommends organisations ought to be doing. And in this case, this is for the benefit of their staff. Collaboratively build security that works for people in your organisation. So there's a lot of other things around there. There's lots of more technically oriented things in the 10 steps. But one of the things that is considered to be worth calling out as relevant for an organisation is engaging and training its staff. So what does that mean a little bit further? Okay, so I'll unpack that one probably in a slide or two's time, actually. I told you it's a voyage of discovery for me to find out what comes next each time I click. The 10 steps overall, okay. I mean, look at the results here. This is, by the way, because I've not put a citation on the slide, this is from the current version of the Cybersecurity Breaches Survey. So you may have encountered that. If you haven't, it's freely available from the UK government website. So conducted by Ipsos each year for DCMS, the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport. And what this particular result from that survey is telling us is the extent to which organisations in the UK of different sizes of businesses I've picked out here. There are some results for charities as well, but I've cropped them off the slide. The extent to which businesses are considered to comply with the 10 steps as a whole. To begin with, let's look at that before we home in on the engagement and training one. So overall, across the 10 steps, half of businesses in the UK have done something about at least half of the 10 steps. So okay, it's not a great result. It's better if you look at large organisations, and even the medium ones are doing fairly well. I mean, by my dubious grasp of maths, and anyone who knows me will tell you it really is a dubious grasp, that's almost all of them in terms of the large organisations have done at least half of the 10 steps. But if we look at all of the 10 steps, so the action taken on all of them, it's less of a positive picture, particularly if you look at businesses overall, where it's only 4%. Let's just go back to those 10 steps. Now I know which way the slides go. Look at those 10 steps and the names of them and what you understand from the brief descriptions while I ramble, and think, is there anything in that list that you would think, a typical organization could ignore. So no, this is nothing to do with us. We don't need to worry about asset management. We don't need to worry about data security. We don't need to care about incident management, etc. Is there anything that's ignorable in that context? And I would sort of suggest probably not. Even supply chain security, where it says collaborate with your suppliers and partners. Well, you're not necessarily the key player in the supply chain. You might be the supplier to somebody else rather than having people supplying to you. You are very likely in a supply chain somewhere. So even that one, which is one of the more recent additions to the 10 steps, because there was an earlier version. This is the version that was introduced in 2021. If you go back in the literature, you'll see the 10 steps from 2012 until 2021 were a bit different to this. So supply chain security is one of the newer additions. So, okay, not a great picture for action on all of the 10 steps, but that's a distraction anyway, because the one I was interested in drawing attention to was the one about engagement and training. Remember that thing about not supporting users? So that's how they break down in terms of the attention towards the different steps. And what we can see is highlighted in the same subtle fashion as I highlighted it before. The engagement and training one is not getting as much love as perhaps some of the others. And I've color coded the ones that where more than half of the organizations are doing something in relation to the steps. And we can see that engagement training, it's less than a third of organizations have taken some action there, or taken a key action in that context. And just to unpack what the cybersecurity breaches survey counted as people being considered to do something that complied with engagement and training, there were two things, if my hands become visible, two things that were considered to be relevant there. First was, had you done any cybersecurity training or awareness for the general staff population within the prior 12 months? Now, from my memory, the exact result for that was 17% of organizations said they'd done something there. The other thing that counted for this option was if they'd done any mock phishing with their staff in the past 12 months, and the result for that was 19%. So the intersection between if they've done that or they've done that, 29% fit into that category. And I would suggest, this is my view on it, that actually doing mock phishing against your staff, if you're not doing some sort of training and awareness to accompany it, isn't really engaging and training your staff in a positive way. So the bit that really this ought to say for me is 17%, because that was the proportion that had done training or awareness in the last 12 months. And to be honest, even that's a bit generous, because if you've only done cybersecurity training and awareness in the last 12 months, that probably suggests you're not keeping it very live for people. Okay, so engagement and training, not a majority sport, is the thing that I'm pointing out here. So what does it actually mean? So this is that bit about unpacking it a little bit more. So if you go to the NCSE's website, you'll find that nice infographic, but you'll also find a more detailed description of each of the 10 steps. And under the engagement and training one, this is only still a summary of what it talks about. There's more detail under each of these bullets. Is you need to encourage your senior leaders to lead by examples. Fairly basic thing that, if you're not setting a good example, why would you expect people to do what you're asking? To build an effective dialogue with your staff so that there is a communication around cybersecurity, why it's important, what they need to do. The exact wording of the 10 steps calls it, consider running security awareness campaigns. I hope, particularly as NCSE is talking about this being for medium or large organizations more particularly, I'd hope it went a bit more than consider doing. I would suggest there ought to be something that's there to help actively promote cybersecurity awareness and to tailor the cybersecurity training to address the needs of your organization. And actually that's probably, it's given equal prominence with the other 4 steps there, but that's probably the hardest one to actually address in practice, because in a sense, we can all, if we've got the money to do so, go out and buy an off-the-shelf training package for cybersecurity or point people towards online resources that talk about it, but tailoring it to our needs, actually making sure it speaks to our user staff community, takes that little bit more effort. Okay, so easily said, perhaps harder to do. So it's quite I always think it's quite nice. So they call them the 10 steps, but if you're not actively doing things in relation to some of them, they're a bit more than a step. A step makes it sound like a fairly straightforward thing. It could be considered a little bit more of a leap to get from where you are to where perhaps you would like to be or need to be. All right, so back to that thing, and my memory was suitably accurate on that occasion. It was 17% had done training or awareness in the last 12 months on average across the business population. Again, if you look at the result for charities, it was something similar to the average for businesses. But what we can see here is, okay, the likelihood of there being some training in the last 12 months significantly improves as the organisation gets larger. So large firms almost, not quite, but almost 2/3 have done training in the last 12 months. Does make you wonder about the 40-odd% that didn't do anything there. What's happening in those large organisations around cybersecurity, I wonder. Okay, why? So you might think, here's your potential sort of thing. Yes, Steve, but maybe those 40% of large organisations and the nigh on, well, over 80% of business overall that aren't doing cybersecurity training in the last 12 months, maybe they don't need to because nothing happens to them and it's all wonderful in their garden and everything's fine. No. So in actual fact, when you look at what actually happens amongst the same community in terms of the incidents that they've encountered, a significant proportion of them are encountering something. So we can see that almost all of them, again, my rough rounding and dubious maths and number appreciation, almost everybody has encountered something in terms of phishing attacks. Now, it doesn't mean they all had somebody who fell for it, but there's a high degree of incidence of phishing attacks going on. And there's other things in the mix there. You've got your malware, you've got hacking attempts, you've got denial of service. There's lots of things that people could encounter. Now, I've posed a question in the slide title, staff assisted. So which of these breach categories could be easier to avoid if we had a more cyber aware staff community? Well, I would suggest that these ones in particular are things that if you've supported your staff to understand what the threats might be, how they might encounter them, and the things that they ought to be thinking about protecting, so what are your assets of value and what are the ways in which somebody might go and target them, these are the sorts of things that you're not going to obliterate the need for other protective measures to deal with them, but you will perhaps make a contribution here, or you will likely make a contribution by making staff more aware that these things are things that could come and directly face them. The other thing, the other reason I say it's not the case that they didn't need the staff awareness is what happens after a breach and what tends to be the most common response here. And this is amongst the organisations who were asked to consider their most disruptive, as the survey calls it, breach or attack in the prior 12 months. And you can see there that for the businesses, about a fifth of the organisations after their most disruptive breach, what they ended up doing was additional staff communication or additional staff training. So that suggests to me, and again, I might be just interpreting it to the favour of the point I want to make, but that suggests that perhaps if that training or communication had been done in advance of an incident occurring, then the incident might not have become a breach. So it says here, most disruptive breach or attack. If it was disruptive, I would consider it was likely to have been a breach, not just an attack that they detected. Okay, so we don't do it proactively. We quite often do it reactively in terms of training and supporting staff in this context. Let's see if I can get the slides to it. And oh, look, I'm highlighting it there. On the other thing that is relevant, if I do spot it there, no, there wasn't one about that. I thought there was also something about rewriting policy, but it's not there this time. Okay, so thinking about how training is provided. So, okay, 17% of the organisations at least said they did training of some form in the last 12 months. Big tick for them, they've provided some training. But there is then a quote, what the survey didn't investigate further is, okay, what's that training like? What are you actually doing? Now, again, those of you listening to this now, might be reflecting on, okay, we have cybersecurity training in our organization. Some of you might be thinking, yeah, we have it, it's perfect, it's really good, it's really engaging, and it actively tells us how it relates to our organization, and it's something that motivates us to be really proactive in our cybersecurity behavior. Others of you might be thinking, yeah, we've got this thing that we had to go through this online training, let's say, and it was question, watch some stuff, click some things, answer some questions, and get it out the way. And so, you use the chat, use the reactions to tell me what sort of thing your experience of cybersecurity training, if you've had it, feels more like. Because certainly there's plenty of it that fits the mold that I'm suggesting on this slide, and I've put training in sort of quote marks there at the top, because I wonder the extent to which that's really providing training. Okay, it's perhaps raising, as I said at the bottom, it's perhaps raising awareness of certain things, but if you were then confronted with those things, would you feel trained, even educated, in how to deal with them in practice? Possibly not. So the outcome of this sort of thing, if this is the way that it's being tackled, is that users potentially more informed about the topic. They know there's a thing that they need to be concerned about. They know there's a technology perhaps that they can use. But would they be more capable as a result of this in actually handling it for real? Answering a question, clicking, mock phishing them, answering stuff and sort of click the thing that you think suspicious in a training program. Okay, with things like phishing, we can put it to the test. I mentioned the mock phishing earlier, so you can do that if your organisation is suitably equipped and prepared to do it properly. Send a test, test phishing messages to your user community and see how they respond, and see if the training has been effective. But if the training is only extended to telling them there's phishing stuff, then here's an example of a suspicious message, here's what it looks like, there, you're trained, and now we'll launch mock messages at you and then see if you respond and fall for it or not. That's not necessarily positioning people in a particularly effective way to start with. So you actually want to educate them more even around that. And certainly doing mock phishing without having done any preparatory training and support is probably not a fair situation. Okay. And here's an example of how an actual product, I won't say which one it was, describes itself. It's an e-learning and awareness module within this wider thing that's provided. So information security fundamentals, this formal security awareness training program is based on a 30-minute, twice as long as I said, 30-minute e-module. Each employee must take this training at least once a year. Good, keep taking the same thing. The training will conclude with a course test that you must pass in order to receive certification. You will be certified, maybe certifiable, after having done this repeatedly year on year. Okay, so obviously we're not seeing what the detail of this particular module might be lovely, but doing that at least once per year, just repeating by rote, that the more you do the same thing, the more you'll understand and be trained, certified, in fact, in cybersecurity. I'm not sure whether that's necessarily going to cut it. And so, mentioned phishing. Here's a different type of fish. Different approaches we seem to see or could think about for security training. And the one that particular example just then seemed to suggest is what I'll call the goldfish approach, where basically it seems to assume that staff will forget everything and we need to tell them annually the same thing again so that it refreshes their memory, and therefore they are trained each year, but still likely to forget it, is the assumption. And what it might be nice to get more towards, and particularly if you're a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy Douglas Adams fan, you'll know what the Babel fish is. Because Babel fish, you take it and you stick it in your ear, and don't do that with other fish, it's not good for you. But the Babel fish, the idea is that it translates things, it translates language into a manner that you will understand. And what I'm talking about here is that you take the security messages and you present them to staff actually in a language that's meaningful to them. So, so things about phishing messages and looking at suspicious URLs. Let's tell everybody, tell our lay user community that they should look at the URL, because although it might be a term that many of us are familiar with, many people don't know what the URL is. Web address would be the term that would be perhaps more meaningful for people. And even something like that translates it into a language that a greater proportion of the user base, the staff base will get. And something that they can relate to, so contextualize it for their environment, their use. Again, that thing that the NCSC step said about tailoring it to your staff, the tricky bit, to be honest, but nonetheless useful. So if we want to get buy-in and get people to understand what it means for them and why it matters, etc., I've put here what I'll term the big 5 set of questions that you want people to be able to have answered for them or to answer for themselves. Firstly, oh, here we go. It's going to animate it all because I did it like that. But why? Why does it matter? This security thing, this element of security, whatever it is that we're asking them to think about, and why should I, as an individual, have to care about it? Why should you care as well? And if we answered that question, then okay, there's a thing that somebody needs to be concerned about, but okay, whose concern is it to do something about it? So is it something I have a role in dealing with? So this phishing thing that you've told me about, okay, I know now that it's something that the organisation cares about. I sort of ostensibly care about it, but what do I really have to do? Is it something that somebody else is handling for me? So do I need to know about it, or do I actively need to do something about it? And if I need to do something about it, what is it that I'm supposed to do? And then how do I do that, and where and when? What, where? Yes, that slide needs correcting. It should be when and where, not what, where. Bad. So when and where is it relevant? Does it apply to everything I'm using, or does it apply in particular situations? Okay, so look, if you can answer these things, people actually are in a position where they know the answers to these things. They're already more informed, at least they're on the right page about what their responsibility is and how they're supposed to enact it. Quite often, though, we're not even answering some of the basics for people. So thinking about, okay, you probably have seen some of these sort of messages to the way we communicate to people. So, you might well have seen something that tells you don't open suspicious attachments. That now, okay, sort of on the surface sounds sort of sensible enough, but don't open a suspicious attachment. If you recognized it as being suspicious in the first place, I would hope that you would know now. I mean, okay, we know that some people will, that looks suspicious, let's see what it is. But ideally, people shouldn't do that. So attackers will be actively working to try and ensure that things don't look suspicious, because they know that people are meant not to open suspicious attachments. So don't make it look suspicious, make it look like something that ought to be opened. Don't click links in messages, don't click links in your emails, say many guidance sources. But many organisations, of course, including those that send out the warnings and solicitations to you not to click links in emails, will then send you emails with links in them. Quite legitimately, they're sending the message that they then want you to click a link in. So we need, if we're saying that sort of thing, we need to re-engineer our processes so that we don't rely on sending people messages with links in them. Or if, and I'm using that term URLs here now, or educate people on how to check the links to make a judgment on whether it's a genuine looking link, whether it looks suspicious, and understand, I can call them web addresses to make it sound nicer, but we do need people to understand what a uniform resource locator looks like, to know if it's well formed, to know if that is something that's trying to disguise the fact it's going somewhere else. And a nice one, use strong passwords, everybody. You should do that, because that protects things. It's better to have a strong one. Strong passwords, but don't use weak passwords. That's the other thing. Use strong, don't use weak. But do we ever characterize and explain to people what strong looks like, or indeed what a weak password looks like? So the fact they're needing to be told to do this perhaps suggests that it's not universal common knowledge about what good looks like in this context. So this sort of messaging, this sort of vague stuff, this not particularly helpful stuff to people is not supporting them very well. So now let's home in on an example. So jumping a little bit of a track now, because I've been talking up to now about how we provide support or don't in organisations and the things that the organisation is perhaps in control of. So as to avoid sort of pointing out any individual organisation in terms of its workplace, let's look at something where users more generally need to use something. There's this thing called the password. I would ask you to put hands up and do a Teams reaction to show me if you use passwords, but I'll assume that everybody does. And so it's an issue for all of us. It may be one that gradually over time is going to disappear, but at the moment we're all users of passwords. And well, you're all dialed into a session about security, so I'm sure you all know what a strong password is, and I'm sure you'll quite happily now type your passwords into the chat to demonstrate how strong they are. So feel free to share your passwords and fail at the first hurdle there if you wish. Meanwhile, I'll carry on and show a list of things that hopefully doesn't include your password. If you're now looking at this slide and say, oh, there's my password, there's the one that I had before, and there's another one there, then more shame on you than on me for having got that what and where and when or whatever it was wrong on the previous slide. Here is a list of the, well, they get referred to as the worst passwords or the most common passwords for about the last decade now, from a series of studies, initially by Splash Data and most recently taken over and published by NordPass, it seems. And these are the top 10 out of the top 200 in each year of release of the most common, we'll call them, passwords. And well, you can see there's some commonality in the most common ones. If we look across the top there, well, the word password was the most common choice in 2012, and since then it's been 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I guess the reason 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is a common choice is because there are many systems that ask you for a password or a passcode of at least 6 characters, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 meets that criterion. And it's quite memorable for people, and so they use it, perhaps because they don't know any different. And then there's other things in there. The word password, of course, nobody would guess that people might use the word password as their password, so many people use it, and other things like keyboard patterns like QWERTY, and so people going the full extra mile there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. They've got a 10-character password. That's a lot stronger. Okay, so lots of known bad choices. Okay, things that are predictable, things that are not strong enough in terms of their character composition, not long enough to withstand a password attack if you've got the password database, etc., and things that you could predict that people might use. I mean, if don't do this, but if you were doing a so-called password spraying attack where you just try some passwords against a number of targets or accounts on a particular system, you don't keep trying until you lock the account out, but try on lots of different accounts, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Odds are that somebody's chosen that password unless they've been prevented from doing so, and so you might get lucky and be able to log in using that common password against a number of accounts. As I say, don't do it. That would be misuse, but you must not do it. Okay, so those things get published, and then each year there's some commentary. There's a little sort of media frenzy around the time that this gets released, and it's around December each year, so look out for it. In about a month and a half, there'll be the latest version of this, hopefully, so I can update my slide and keep it going for another year. Sort of things that, it says, it's blaming the users. People are doing exactly what they're not supposed to do, the silly people. Fools. Despite years and years of tech companies warning consumers to use hard to crack passwords plus 2-factor authentication, people are still using laughably insecure codes. That's you, your people, you're doing that. Hopefully you're not, but it's us. It's you and me. We're the stupid ones. We're doing it. There. Bad. We should go and hang our heads in shame. But we won't, because we've got more of this to go through. So, what are the problems with passwords then? Okay, poor choices. We've seen some of that. They're too short. Some of those were too short. Makes them crackable. Common words. We saw exactly that they're common things. Personal information. We use you know, those people that don't use password and I love you and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 as their, you know, using car registration numbers, surnames, pet names, etc., which are vulnerable then to social engineering, somebody knowing the information or extracting it from them, or finding it on social media where they post pictures of their pet. Oh, it's Fluffy the rabbit. Oh, Fluffy. Written down or written in places where other people could find them. That's not a good thing to do. The stereotypical thing of on post-it notes on the monitor or hidden under the keyboard or in the drawer. Anyone seen the film War Games? You'll know the reference there to finding in the drawer beside the computer. Retain for long periods, an increased opportunity for an imposter to use the password if it's been discovered. Now, that means change your password. That's one of those things that actually current advice would say, don't worry about changing the password and don't force people to change the password because it's bad enough to get them to choose a good one and remember it in the first place. So get them to choose a decent password and let them keep it and have ways of notifying them if the password's been compromised. Something we shouldn't do is the same password on multiple systems, because obviously if you use the same password in multiple places, if it's cracked in one place, somebody gets into everything else as well, could do. So which of these problems are avoidable? So can we avoid people making poor choices? I would say we can, if I could get the thing to work. There we are, there's a green tick. Yeah, we can get people to avoid poor choices by stopping them making them or educating them away from them. Can we stop people from, or can we avoid writing them down? Yeah, we can do, particularly if we help people to create memorable passwords, or we encourage them to write them down, store them in more secure locations, like password managers, for example. Retain for long periods. Can we get people to change the password? Yeah, we can. We don't necessarily want to, but we can avoid that. Oops, gone the wrong way with it. And can we stop them using the same password on multiple systems? Yes, we can, but we need to have a means of, again, encouraging them to understand why that's a bad thing. And you can, to some degree, also now with certain platforms, it will tell you if you're using the same password on multiple systems and try and encourage you not to do so. If you've got a password manager, for example, it can spot that. So thinking about the first bit, just a bit about poor choices, because that's the bit that I'm going to home in on. Why do people keep making those poor choices? We saw a decade's worth of evidence that the words password and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, amongst others, are there year on year. We've known it for more than a decade that these are common choices as well. I've just got a decade's worth of evidence there. So why do it persist? Is it because people, you and me, are we stupid? Maybe. You know, you might know some people to which you would ascribe this label. I will not judge you. They might judge you if they found out, so don't tell them. People generally don't like being told that they're stupid. But that's one potential reason. Is it because passwords are just a bad method? It's a flawed approach. We shouldn't be using them. We should be using biometrics or physical locks and keys on every computer, or something else other than passwords. Maybe. Is it because we're allowing these things to be used and we're allowed to choose them? These poor decades worth of somebody using the word password as their password. Why don't we block the word password from being used? So that's the one that I think is the primary problem here. Stupid people might still exist. Passwords are still no good, but we're still allowing people to do this. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the most common password for 9 years, and password has been in the top 10 for 15 years, however long you want to consider it. Since passwords have been used, the word password has been used as a password, perhaps we could stop people using them. Maybe. Okay, so let's think, do we do that? Here is an example of a website. You can see what website it is, and you can see 2 versions of it, actually. It's been updated in the last 5 years at some point, more recently. So in 2017, that's what it looked like. 2022, it looks like that. It looks different, more modern now. It's got a pop-up thing comes out, you know, window overlaid for the signing up process. So in both cases, it's the same information being requested. It's asking who you are and what's your email address, and please choose a password and tell us your birthday, and your gender. Well, you can have a that's the one thing that's changed in the 2022. You can have a custom gender. We've become usefully more inclusive. That's the only thing that's changed, except it's a pop out. The thing that I'm going to home in on, the thing about the password, hasn't changed. So what we're not getting told there is anything up front. If you look at it in the context of the 2022 version, because you can see the empty prompt before I've typed some characters into it, it just says new password because you're signing up to this service. Doesn't say anything there about how long that new password might need to be, any guidance, advice on the composition of that password, anything to avoid in your choice of nothing. But you need to choose a new password. Please do that. Based upon all the historic knowledge and good practice that you've accumulated over the years of choosing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and password on various other services, is the thing that it's saying. And okay, then once you get through the process of typing a password in, you then get some feedback telling you, no, you did it wrong. So, okay, looking at the first interface there, we've now typed our, 5-character password, if I can read it properly with my bad eyesight, but I'm not wearing my glasses, so it doesn't help at this distance, and I'm too vain. 5 characters. Press sign up. The green button at the bottom. Then I get a warning. Your password must be at least 6 characters long. Please try another. Okay. Now, why couldn't, just as a thought, see that version back there then again, where it says new password, could have had in brackets after that at least 6 characters. What would it take? What would it cost to say that? Just there, visibly on the screen, in advance of somebody typing something, tell them that there's a criterion there. It needs to be at least 6 characters. Is it that off-putting? Okay, so right, I'm now going to type my new password. What I'd done is I'd done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the first box. I'm now going to add the 6. Okay, so I've now got a 6-character password. Doesn't work. Third interface there. Please choose a more secure password. It should be, this is good, it should be longer than 6 characters. Previous thing said to me it should be at least. Now it should be longer then. Make your mind up. Unique to you and difficult for others to guess. Okay. So now I have slightly got a bit of guidance as to what more secure might mean. It needs to be unique to me, difficult for others to guess. So maybe that will now guide me away from using the word password or other things like that. But I've still not got any tangible guidance about what secure, strong, whatever actually means here. Okay. So having spotted this quite some time ago, I thought back in 2007, I'd do a little bit of a study around this. How much guidance do websites, leading websites like that one, provide for their users when asking them to sign up? How much guidance do they provide when users change their passwords? And how much do they provide when they reset them? And how much enforcement is there? Now, published that paper in 2007, got some citations. I thought, well, that's interesting. So I then thought, okay, I could do that again and again and again. And so I've done it now 5 times, most recently this year, because once I have a good idea, what I think is a good idea, I'm not going to let go of it because simply, I've got no other good ideas. So I basically did this again recently for 10 leading websites. And looked at what they do in terms of the guidance they provide and whether they allow bad password choices to be made. And so let's have a look and see what the situation was. So you can see the paper there in Computers and Security. That's published this year. So what do I mean with the guidance? So are users told anything prior to starting to choose a password? So that last example where they're told nothing other than you've got to choose a password, it's an example of not being told anything. Is there any detailed or explanatory information on selecting good passwords and what the site requires? So is there something that they can link to further to tell them more about password selection, password management? Clearly on that last one, there wasn't. Does the user get any feedback interactively while they enter the password, like a password meter, strength rating, etc.? Well, there wasn't on that last example. There is on some others. And are they told something after they've tried to submit the password that doesn't meet requirements? That's what we saw in that example there. We got two different messages telling them when they weren't meeting the requirements that weren't quite consistent with each other. And then, regardless of whether they provide any guidance, do they enforce any rules to make sure we don't still choose crappy passwords regardless? So, even if we've not been guided at all, as long as the site is there as a safety net, making sure that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and password aren't chosen, when perhaps that's good enough. We basically direct the user to the point where they've chosen a good password but don't understand how. So does the site enforce a minimum password length? And if so, what is it? Is the user prevented from using their surname as their password? We know that's a common choice. Does the site prevent the reuse of the user's user ID or their email, then their username as the password? We know some people like to do that because they can remember that. They can type it twice. Are they prevented from using the word password? You know why that is. We've seen that one. Does the site filter out use of other common words, other words that you'd find in the dictionary, things that would be easily cracked if there was a cracking tool deployed against a captured password database? And does the site enforce the composition of the password? So does it enforce complexity, requiring you to have uppercase, lowercase, numbers, symbols, etc.? That used to be regarded as a good thing and something to do, and what the guidance would say was good practice. Now, the guidance is actually opposite to that. Don't enforce complexity because it makes users or guides users towards choosing passwords they might not remember as easily. So actually what you want is to guide them towards a longer password, not necessarily a more complex one in terms of the characters. That's guidance from the NCSC, National Cyber Security Centre here, and also NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology in the US, amongst others. Now, these criteria were the same things I used in the earlier versions of the study as well. Additional checks that I did for this year's version of it: is the user prevented from using password1 exclamation mark as their password? So that password, you will notice, has uppercase, lowercase, numeric and punctuation characters in it. So therefore, by some password meters reckoning, that's a strong password because it's got multiple character types. Is the user permitted to use 3 random words? 3 random dictionary words as their password? The reason for that is because that's the recommended good practice for getting yourself to a long but difficult to crack password from the National Cyber Security Centre. So we tested whether they allowed that. And does the site allow you to use password choices that your browser can generate for you automatically? So it automatically generates you a strong password. But we found in the past that some websites don't then allow those to be chosen because they don't meet complexity or they don't meet character composition requirements, or they're too long or something like that. And does the site offer any additional protection? So the guidance bit. And remember, I said about, sort of why give users guidance when we can get them to guess? Not a lot of sites providing tangible guidance or any guidance, in some cases up front. So you've got the sites there. These are the 10 sites that I've selected for this year's version of the study. It's not the exact 10 same sites in earlier versions because I've selected them from the top 10 English language speaking sites within the Alexa Global Top 500. So the first 10 sites that I could find that were in English and weren't using the same login system. So YouTube, if you look at the Alexa Top 500, is very highly ranked, but it uses the Google login. So there's no point having YouTube and Google there because they're exactly the same. So you can see that some of them provide some information prior to you typing a password, prior to choosing one when you sign up. We see Facebook, which we looked at the example of before, that doesn't. Some others do, but in many cases what it's telling you is not very much. It might just tell you the minimum length, so it needs to be at least 6 characters, let's say. Is there any link to tangible guidance that you can go to and see more about what choosing and using passwords should be about? No, none of them have that. Is there any feedback during the attempt? Well, we can see that that in one case there's a password meter. In some cases there's messages that come up to tell you if it's too weak at that point, etc. And in one case, Instagram there, it doesn't give you any messages, but once you've met the minimum password length, the button that allows you to go forward next it's initially ghosted out and then it becomes enabled, and so you know you've typed a qualifying password. And all of the others, they provide you with feedback only after you've entered something they don't like, basically. So things they could have told you in advance, they tell you retrospectively and say, now choose a new password. Okay, so not very helpful in supporting the user, I would say. And this post-attempt feedback, okay, so the bit where most of them got a tick, even there, it's not necessarily very helpful. So we saw the Facebook feedback already. Google, please choose a stronger password. And it then at least qualifies that and tells you how you might get to that. Try a mix of letters, numbers and symbols. Okay, it's not the only thing that might make it stronger. A longer password would be a fundamentally useful thing to tell people. It doesn't tell them that. LinkedIn, not so helpful. Please enter a more secure password. If I knew what a more secure password was, I might have entered it in the first place. You've not told me anything about it. I'll just have another potluck attempt. And Reddit says the same thing in a more direct manner. That password is unacceptable. Doesn't tell you why, but at least now you've been told off, and you've got a password meter to tell you it was bad as well. So at least there was a chance for you to know you were on the wrong track with Reddit, because there was that little meter on the right hand side and an exclamation mark, but you've ignored it and you've pressed return anyway, and now you're told it's unacceptable. Okay, serves you right, actually. And in terms of enforcement then, so not a lot of guidance, we could say. What about what's allowed to happen? And it's a very mixed picture, as you can see. So we see a variation in the minimum length of passwords. The one thing that's positive compared to all the other incarnations, the 4 earlier versions of the study, 3 to 4 years apart, was at least this year, the 10 sites that I used all had a minimum length requirement. In the previous studies, you had some sites that would let you choose a 1-character password. Do they prevent your surname? Well, in most cases, no. In several of those cases, because they don't ask you what your surname is in a way that they can then use it to parse your password choice. If you ask the user their surname, you can then check that they're not using it as their password or in their password. Do they prevent the user ID or the email, the bit before the @ being used as a password? In most cases, yes, but still 3 cases, no. Do they prevent the use of the word password, which we've already seen is a common choice and therefore quite predictable that people didn't? Well, mostly yes, but one doesn't prevent it. You can see that top case, Amazon doesn't prevent very much. Do they prevent the use of password 1 exclamation mark? And if you've not seen Michael McIntyre's little skit on our choices of passwords, he'll tell you how we end up at password 1 exclamation mark, and most sites will readily let us use it, it would seem. Do they prevent dictionary words? Some of them, yes, many of them, no, and some of them somewhat, because they're doing it based on some of those common words being too short, not because they're specifically blocking those words. And I've not got the list of words that I use, but I use some of the words from the Splash Data and NordPass list of common passwords. So things like monkey, for example, which would be too short for several of the sites. So Wikipedia, Twitter, for example, would block that by default because it's not long enough. And then I was using some longer words like dictionary, and then dictionary 1 with a capital D and a 1 at the end, to see if they would get spotted and blocked as well. So we see that only a couple of sites do this particularly well. Do they enforce composition, which remember we don't want them to do now? Only one does that. Yahoo, for example, gets a little, well, sometimes indicated, because it depends on the length of password you've chosen. If you've chosen one that's only 7 characters, it looks for there to be more complexity in terms of the character types. If you've gone for a 9-character password, it will let you have all the same type of character. Do they allow 3 random words? I've said that Microsoft Live doesn't, because if I type them all in lowercase, it wouldn't let me have them. It would let me do it if I did, you know, monkey, goat, spanner or something like that with a leading uppercase or uppercase somewhere in it, but it won't just let me type them all in lowercase. The others would, which I think is more helpful. And do they allow browser generated passwords? Yes, they all do, at least the ones that Safari was generating for me. And do they provide extra protection? So can you do, for example, 2-factor or 2-step verification, or can you enable that on the accounts? In most cases, yes, but you're not necessarily pushed very strongly towards it. So it's perhaps more by chance that users might find it. So again, not necessarily being supported to understand what's there. One thing that was interesting, I thought it was interesting, was that you do get guidance. You don't get much up front when you sign up to the service, but you do get some when you change your password. So if you then go into the system and decide, I'm going to change my password, I'm going to volunteer to change it, you then get rather different prompts and guidance. So Facebook, which we saw had nothing before, now has a tip underneath the thing saying it's a good idea to use a strong password that you don't use elsewhere, and it has a password rating. It tells us the password strength is weak there, for the one that I've typed, which is probably all the same character or something like that. But I'm getting a slight tip and I'm getting useful feedback as I type the password. I'm not having to commit it and then find that it didn't like it. Google now has 2 links where you can find out more about choosing strong passwords, and it gives you a strength meter rating as well. So far more information than you could have got when you signed up when you change your password. Similarly with LinkedIn, which had nothing to begin with, now it's got some tips on what the strong password looks like. Remember, LinkedIn was the one that just told you to choose a more secure password without telling you at sign up what more secure looked like. And Yahoo, which was actually quite good in terms of its enforcement, as was Google, as possibly with LinkedIn. Yahoo, a link to password help, and a strength meter rating thing. A strength rating, not a meter. It's telling you weak, medium, strong, or whatever. And it tells you why it's rated that. It doesn't just say it's weak, it tells you why it's weak, because it's too easy to guess, which, you know, helps users understand what weak means in this context. So far more, you know, it's still not a full explanation, but some of them have got a link where you can find out more. But there's more that somebody can understand. They are more supported as users. So why is it there at the change point, but not at the sign up? And I guess from the operators, the service provider, perhaps if you're trying to push too much security at people when they're creating an account, and that's what you as a provider want, that they might not create an account and you won't have them as a user, won't add to your millions of existing users. From the user perspective, from us, not being bothered by security, not having to, you know, see this meter or see these tips when we want to create the account, might make it feel more usable for us until the point where it rejects the password we've chosen and we've got to keep trying until we get it right. So maybe weaker security is making the site seem more acceptable. But for me, the issue here is that if these leading website providers, these leading service providers were doing these things, helping to encourage better practice, now, this is going to make a contribution towards supporting users more generally in their use of other services. It's promoting, as it says there, better cybersecurity literacy by sites that many people use. And so if they can learn it there, they can take that practice and use it on other sites as well. So here, just as an example, here's the sort of thing. This is, I think, from probably the maybe gov.uk website in this particular case. Just some tips that you can have a drop down there that tells you, it's not right there in your face from the outset, but you can have a drop down, tells you what good looks like when you're creating a password. And it tells you must be at least 12 characters. It's not rocket science to put this there. And then mentioned NCSC's thing about using 3 random words. Don't use torch, pizza, pineapple as your password because it might be a little bit common. But yeah, that a very meaningful, or perhaps meaningful picture for people to help them understand how to choose a password. What it doesn't tell them is what the resulting password is there, but promoting the message and supporting people if we put these messages around for them. Having a link to guidance on the site or on server in your organization. If you've got a password policy and you're telling people you need to choose a strong password, help them to understand what it is. So finally, having rambled on for ages. Going back to what we said right at the start, users are not secure by default. You know, this isn't the position that most people enter in their use of technology. And they're not going to have knowledge then unless we help to give it to them. If we, as organizations and website providers, want particular types of security behavior, we need to support people in reaching that. We need to show them the way. Just telling you that you're responsible for it and then say it's over to you, take your responsibility and enact it, not going to work. Awareness, guidance, reminders, nudges, usable technologies, all of that has a role to play. It's not one or the other. All of this stuff will help. So thinking about it as a user, you know, sort of parting questions. As a user, do you feel that you receive these things? And as an organization, particularly if you're in a position to influence it, do you feel that you provide it for your users? And with that, I finally finished talking. There's my contact details and Twitter, if you want to follow me on Twitter, if you use Twitter. If you use Twitter, make sure you choose a good password on Twitter. That's a good thing. Okay, that's it. Thank you much.
Thank you, Professor Stephen. I think we all had a very good laugh. It was a brilliant 1 hour that you did, and we really enjoyed. Some of the your the slides were too funny and the context was too funny, but it was a good take on how users are not to be blamed, and it was quite apparent from your the study, and it was nice. There was an in-depth study on the passwords, how they are processing. I mean, we go to one side, we don't really do that much of an in-depth analysis of what is happening with these common websites, but that's put together. You could see how they're putting onus on the users. You decide a good password and then come back and then we'll tell you it's not. So it was a nice analysis. We could see how things are being pushed onto the user side and trying to tell them you can't do it. It was really nice and very entertaining and very, very interesting and very nice. We really enjoyed this 1 hour workshop. Really
Thank
nice.
you. So I notice there's a question in the chat, which is asking, are most information security training things effective? How can we investigate effectiveness of the training? Have I got time to answer that one?
Yes, please. Yes,
okay,
please.
So I mean, I think it's there's not a single answer to that. So are most of the things effective? Well, I certainly wouldn't say all of them are. And I was sort of talking earlier and giving the examples of things where you're just asking people to watch something, maybe answer a few questions, you know, maybe drag and drop a few things. Depending on how it's presented to people, very often it won't be effective. It might be effective in, you know, being able to then tick a box in the organization and say people have been trained, but yeah, has it been effective in changing their outlook on security, affecting their behavior, their understanding of it? Yeah, possibly not. And I think also the organization needs to think about what it's seeking to promote in terms of the security behaviors that it wants people to enact. So, okay, what is it you want them to do? And yeah, what do they need to understand and be able to do in order to then behave that way? And is the, you know, if it's an online training thing where they run an online module, is that module, is the content of that positioning us to get to that point? And so, yeah, it is something where we need to reflect on what we're trying to get to and what building blocks we've got to get us there. And unfortunately, it's not an easy thing to do. There is no magic wand to say, you know, suddenly tailor your training and everything's done. No, it's, wish it was that easy, because, well, actually, you know, it would stop me doing these sort of talks. So no, I sort of quite like the fact it's not simple, because I can then keep going on about it. But yeah, it will vary depending on organisation and what they choose to measure as well. I think the thing with the mock phishing, and the reason many organisations do it, is it gives you a measurable result. You know, 20% of our people fell for the mock phishing thing. And you know, next time we did it, 15% fell for it, so it's been effective. Well, that's not the only context in which people face threats, and it's okay. That's one way you can make it easily measurable. Is it is it actually the threat your organization is facing? I mean, we saw from the cybersecurity breaches survey, yeah, large proportion of organizations encounter phishing attacks. How many of them actually had a problem with them, we're not quite so clear about. So if it's not an issue for your organization, perhaps mock phishing isn't the answer anyway. And are we at risk of just training people to understand what a particular threat looks like in a particular way, rather than really understand what you're trying to protect? It's not, yeah, I want you to be able to spot a phishing message. I want you to safeguard the thing that you'd otherwise give away if you respond to that message, etc.
Brilliant. But you did discuss that a larger organization, Mother says, thank you so much. You did discuss that a larger organization do a lot of training as compared to the smaller one. Because they are more susceptible to attack than the smaller one. And repeated trainings for the users is a little helpful in order to remind them of the training that they did and might have forgotten.
Yeah, so I wouldn't necessarily say more large organizations do it because they're more at risk, more susceptible. I would say larger organizations possibly have a greater recognition that there's something that needs to be done and perhaps more resource to devote towards doing it. Larger organizations are likely to have, or more likely to have, dedicated cyber information security people who will champion the cause, whereas smaller organizations, particularly when you get down to the micro size, well, who's going to put them on the right track in the first place and help them to understand? And I think, yeah, the thing about repetition and just doing it, it's not going to hurt in the sense of getting people to redo the same training, reiterate the message, make sure it sinks in, give them the chance to assimilate the stuff. But just repeating the same thing is probably not going to take people very far, and putting, in a sense, the same message through different media, getting it to people via different routes, increases the likelihood that they'll take it on board. I mean, imagine, for example, that I use that, put it there. Now, NCSC posted there the 3 random words thing. First, if I put that there in the corridor in your organization, on the back of the toilet cubicle door, you'll see it and you'll sort of look at it and you'll, oh, what's that all about then? And then, yeah, you'll see it day to day, and you'll see it in the corridor, you'll see it in the toilet, wherever I've decided to put it. Toilets are a good example of places to put posters, by the way. That's, people are, they'll see them in line of sight. But over time, they're not going to see what it says. They're just going to see, oh, isn't it that thing? I've forgotten what it's about, but I know I've seen that. I'll ignore it now. So the message that it's trying to put out essentially becomes invisible. Whereas if, every week or two I change the poster, oh, it's a new thing. What's that about? You might just get that, might be 2-second, might be 10-second mind share of that person to get them to understand or take on board something else.
True. Brilliant. I think there are no more questions, and I think we can stop now. Thank you so much, Professor Stephen. It was really, really nice talk, and we really enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you for the opportunity to give it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and thank you, audience. Thank you, everyone. Got all the thank yous.